Hello and welcome back to Death and Taxes, your weekly live stream podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your hosting duo, John Humphreys, and joined, as always, is Gene Tunny. How you doing, Gene?
Going well, John. How are you, mate?
Top of the world, another beautiful day in paradise. Although, as I was saying before you got in here, Gene, you know, I'm pretending to be a farmer, right? I'm LARPing as a farmer, right? With my 2 acres, with my 2 sheep and my 6 chickens. We've just been breeding the chickens, and today, once again, Mama Chicken has just crushed all her babies to death. So I've still got there's a few things I still need to work out in my fake life as a farmer. But otherwise, doing well. What was your day full of?
It was good. Well, I did a guest lecture out at the uni, out at UQ. So I talked about the financial crisis. I began it with the topic that we're going to be covering tonight, because I mentioned that it's I won't steal your thunder, but you know what I'm talking about. And then what the financial crisis meant for that, because that was essentially the start of the problem that we're going to be talking about tonight.
Oh, you feel free to steal the thunder there. We were talking about debt, right? So yeah, although feel free to push back when we get to that. I've got some very strong opinions about the fiscal policy used around that time. Although it's dating us now, Gene. That's
well, I guess I feel some. Maybe I will push back a little bit. Probably not too much. I mean, I was more in doing more of the grunt work there, rather than actually saying, well, let's go and spend 1% of GDP or whatever it was on the stimulus. We were desperately trying to work out all of the debt and cash management issues there. But yeah, I'll be keen to discuss it with you a bit later. We'll see how we go.
Anyway, so that is a hint of what's up in front of us. We're going to talk debt on the 20-year anniversary of when Peter Costello paid off net debt the first time round. It's not paid off anymore. Spoiler. We also have a guest coming up. That is Sinclair Davidson, Professor of Institutional Economics, which is the only correct sort of economics, at RMIT University. We're going to also we've threatened to talk about this before. We're going to get into it this time. Kind of a preview of issues coming in this year's budget. Specifically, the government's talking about NDIS reform. What does that mean? Is it serious? There's also this discussion of introducing a gas tax or a gas export tax. So we'll unpack that a little bit. Are they going to introduce a capital gains tax? What other brilliance or insanity or stupidity can we look forward to? And what should they do? I guess we could get into that as well. Maybe if we have time, have a brief look at the upcoming by-elections. We've got 3 coming up, each 1 week after the other, and each one is a bit of a different contest. We'll see if we have time for that. That's plenty in front of us. Before we get to that, can I ask you, if you're watching this, dear listener, and I know you are, because otherwise you wouldn't hear that sentence, could you please give this video a like and a share, boost it around the algorithm? It helps the algorithm gods to know that this is what people should be watching. You'll be watching this if you're live on YouTube or X or Facebook and LinkedIn. It also goes to Gene's LinkedIn channel. And then we post it up later on Substack and Rumble as well. So wherever you are, give us a like there and go and find us on those other platforms. It does help. We do this live, and because we do this live, we get to see your messages. You can write in your comments, your complaints, complaining about how we started late. Thank you, RW. Appreciate it. And g'day, Lyndon. Good to have you back again. And already the argument's getting feisty. Look, realistically, what we probably do most of the time is leave most of the comments till the end. So we go through our rant, and then at the end we address comments, questions. Although if it comes up and it's while we're talking and it's particularly pithy and we see it, then we might chuck it up as we go. There you go. Like. You actually have to also press the like button for it to help us there, RW. But appreciate the love. Thank you. Well, with that out of the way, allow me to introduce our guest for the day, who is Professor Sinclair Davidson, all-round good guy and troublemaker on the free market corner of the economic world, and once famously described as, I think, let's see if I wrote this down correctly, an evil, bald fascist gnome. Welcome, Professor Gnome.
Good evening, guys. How are we going?
Good, Zeke. How are you, mate?
Yeah, all content. As always, trying to overthrow the Westphalian state and create a libertarian society where we can all be left alone from big government. Not succeeding as much, but nonetheless, still giving it a red-hot go.
Right. You'll have to explain why we therefore need to overthrow the Westphalian state. Are you talking about anarchism, are you?
Well, the whole idea that once upon a time, we were all subjects of God. And then we all decided we didn't like the same God, so we decided killing each other wholesale. And they solved this problem by making us all subjects of the state. So we've gone from being slaves to God to slaves of the state, as opposed to being free individuals who can pursue our own happiness as long as we leave everybody else alone and don't interfere in their lives. And so that's what I think is very valuable and important. So we've actually got to identify the state as the problem in our lives.
So I think that's a very interesting start to this, because the Westphalian compromise, or whatever it was called at the time, is often pointed to as the start of the nation state, which I think a lot of people have not spent much time thinking about. Because if we don't have nation states, then it does raise the question of what existed before that, because humans certainly did. And look, I come to a similar situation to you, Sinks, except I give more of the blame to the French Revolution, because I think that's what really screwed up people's concept of the nation state, locked it in, and locked in the loyalty to the nation state. And I think the problem there is people had an instinctive loyalty to their nation, and some cheeky bastard managed to shift that over and say, if you're loyal to your people, you have to be loyal to your political structure. And that was the sleight of hand that the French Revolution embedded in our Western consciousness. And so go back and destroy the French Revolution. Edmund Burke was right.
As I've been saying to you, John, for years and years and years, you're a communist. You have to go back well before the French Revolution, when you think the rot set in. The rot set in when we started thinking we owe obligations to the nation state and to God and to all these people, as opposed to yourself, your family, your friends, people you love, and your trading partners. So as I always say, make profit, not war, and we'll all be good.
Well, I agree with both concepts. I haven't made any war, unfortunately, for most of my life. I haven't made much profit, so I'm failing on one half of that.
I did hear you saying you're killing chickens. I mean, that's shocking. You should be ashamed of yourself, John. Although day-old chickens are very tasty on the barbecue, on a stick.
There was not much meat on the bone there. But anyway, with that as our wonderful introduction for our vegan guests, we usually start this with the substance of our topics by throwing to Gene here, because as I say every week, if you're a normal person, unlike us three, you're not paying close attention to economic data as it rolls in. Good news, you don't have to. You can ignore it all week. Come here and for 5 or 10 minutes, listen to Gene, and he'll tell you everything you need to know that you may have missed. So with that said, Gene, what do we need to know?
Yes. G'day, John. Well, I mean, we've still got the issue in the Middle East, but the oil price is still elevated, despite, well, we've had a ceasefire and then we've had an extension of the ceasefire, but it's not entirely clear what it all means. And I mean, Trump could start attacking Iran again at any time. I mean, I'm not sure the Iranians are going to play nice with him. I mean, there's all sorts of funny games going on over there. But so we've got oil, which seems to have settled in at a high price relative to where it's been. So I don't think that's going to be coming down anytime soon. But what's rather extraordinary is that the market, particularly the US market, has really shrugged this off and is reaching new highs. So if you look at the S&P 500 on the left there, there's a lot of enthusiasm in the States still about AI and what all of that means for their economy, all of the expenditure on data centers, that big build out there, the potential for robotics, etc. So, I mean, the American market's, still strong and, possibly overvalued. I mean, we may end up seeing a correction there, but the markets seem to be shrugging it all off. I mean, perhaps they do think this will be resolved. Trump's got it all under control. I'm less convinced about that. I think we need to wait a bit longer. The Australian market's still down on where it was prior to Iran, but I mean, it could actually still fall much further than that. I mean, I think we still need to see how all of these cost increases flow through to different sectors. I mean, you see all of the reports about 30% plus increases in input costs for plastic products, etc. It's going to impact construction costs. We've got the higher diesel prices. We've got concerns about fertilizer, as we've talked about. So, I think it's still early days and still need to see just how negative things could get. Obviously we'll keep paying attention to what's going on in the markets. One of the markets we are following here is the property market, because that's really impacting people's standard of living. Louis Christopher from SQM came out with some fascinating data on the clearance rates, the auction clearance rates earlier this week, which is showing that they've really plummeted. And I should have worn my glasses, but we've got clearance rates around under 40%, I think, for Sydney, or just a bit above 40 for Melbourne, if I'm reading that correctly. So we're possibly going to see some slowdown in house prices or correction of some kind, and particularly in Sydney and Melbourne there. I mean, maybe eventually in Brisbane. So that could be, possibly that's some good news. Some of the heat could be coming out of the market there. So we'll keep an eye out on that. I mean, there's still issues in the rental market. We have a very significant shortage. The rental vacancy rate is under 1%. It's about 0.8% or something like that. And that's, as we've discussed many times on this show, is a factor to a significant extent of the large population growth related to strong immigration. Okay, so we keep an eye on the property market. And as this is the Australian Taxpayers Alliance live stream, we keep an especially close eye on the tax data. And the ABS released their annual compendium of the state and Commonwealth government tax data. And we see that for the first time, we've got, in the data set they've got back to, back the last 10 years, we've got, and I imagine this is probably an historic high, because, government just keeps growing larger. It's crossed 30% of GDP. So that's tax. That's before royalties and earnings of government-owned corporations. And that pushes if you take all of that into account and the deficits that we're running, that's got to fund a government sector of around 39% of GDP. I think Rob Carlin's figures have it getting up to that. So we've got government to GDP in the sort of high 30s. We've got tax to GDP crossing 30%, and burden of government just keeps growing. And this is obviously a concern for us, because we know that the quality of a lot of that spending is not particularly good. And full credit. I mean, Labor, I think, has finally realised what a millstone or albatross the NDIS is. And they're saying the right things. We've just got to see if they've got the follow through. But I liked what was it Mark Butler, what he had to say, and it looks like they get it. And we just need to see what that follow through looks like. The final thing I want to cover, something we talk about a lot, John, is this off-budget spending, all of the tens of billions of dollars that goes out of the budget in the in investment in financial assets for policy purposes. The off-budget spending, we see just what poor value for money much of this is, where we see that of the Reconstruction Fund, a significant proportion of the money that they're doling out, so $6 billion of it, which has been diverted to net zero initiatives and renewables, that's essentially earning less than the cost of borrowing. So they're losing money on that. So the rate of return they're getting on that is not enough to make up for the borrowing cost. So just not very good investment at all. So a very big fiscal risk there, as we would have predicted. So, John, that's enough from me for the moment. Any thoughts or comments, or Sync? Any comments from you? Any thoughts? Any questions?
Just a quick comment on the last point before Sinks does all the heavy lifting, just so that people at home are aware of this. This fund, the National Reconstruction Fund, as it hands out money and receives less than the rate of interest they're paying to borrow the money they're going to hand out, they're losing money for the government. They're losing money for the taxpayer. It won't be in the budget bottom line. Right. This will all happen off budget. You will not see this impacting the budget bottom line when they announce it on the second Tuesday of May. And that's the point we make about how these, all of these, basically government banks, especially, but also government-run businesses, are a way for them to get up to all manner of shenanigans and have most people not notice them. Thankfully, here, who's the author? Ronald Mizzen. Well, he's
one of the AFR journalists. Yeah.
It won't be in the budget bottom line. And so realistically, the government spends a lot of time caring about that, their underlying cash balance, which is the main thing that's reported. Anything not in the underlying cash balance, they basically have the political attitude that they can screw up the finances, but if it's not in the underlying cash balance, they can get away with it. And politically, realistically, that seems to be true. They can get away with it. So.
Well, this is why Chris Richardson's saying now we should go back to looking at the headline cash balance, because that does have all of that off-budget spending in it. And we've seen that big divergence opening up between the headline cash balance and the underlying cash balance. So Chris Richardson's saying, yep, maybe we should go back to focusing on that.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I don't think headline cash balance includes everything either, does it?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of the stuff that the government spends on investment doesn't actually appear. The way in which you should actually keep track of what's really happening is to actually have a look at the growth in national debt, because you've got to borrow the money. So the growth in national debt is actually telling you what's happening to the underlying figures. So the government claims to have a surplus, and yet national debt's gone up. Well, they don't really have a surplus. That's the bottom line. And another argument that I like to say to people very often is that if the private sector ran their books, their accounting systems, and reported in the same way the federal government did, people would go to jail. And I actually kind of think that there does need to be some after the fact settling up. Our political system more or less works on the bourgeois tendencies of the middle class. So if we are totally scandalized and we throw the government out, that's supposed to be punishment enough for what they've done wrong. Whereas in actual fact, they engage in what politely is called fiscal illusion, where they mislead and obfuscate, knowing full well that most people, they don't really understand, they don't really care enough, and then all of a sudden we get hit with these massive economic shocks, and the population are saying, gee, what's happening here? That's been happening for the last while. The last, let's say, honest people, or reasonably honest people, I have criticisms of Mr. Costello too, but the last reasonably honest people in power were Howard and Costello, where they actually tried to not engage in a lot of these shenanigans. The big shenanigan that they pulled off, of course, was to claim that the GST was a state tax and not a federal tax, because the states were getting the money. So they didn't include the GST in their tax statistics, which, to their credit, when Labor came to power, they just reversed all that and put it back in again. But nonetheless, we've seen the kind of silliness. The NBN, for example, must be one of the biggest schmozzles known to man, is not on the budget at all, and it definitely should be, because they're never going to make that money back. So keep an eye on the debt situation. That will tell you if government's having to borrow money and borrow more and more money. $1.6 trillion.
That's with the states. Yeah, yes, that's the federal government and states. Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say, like,
you got to add those guys back in as well.
Yes. Yeah.
This is obfuscated by a bunch of things. So a few comments here, if you'll indulge me. Firstly, just measuring the budget balance. Like you pick up a newspaper, it'll say deficit 20 billion, whatever it says, right? They'll be talking about the underlying cash balance. There is also the operating balance, the net operating balance, the underlying cash balance, the headline cash balance, the fiscal balance, the impact on debt, as Sinclair was saying. There's all of these different balances, and it can be quite tricky to work out the right one and work out when to use each one. For instance, I just double checked there. The headline cash balance, it includes changes to your net financial position for policy reasons, but not for non-policy reasons. So if you just make a loss, if you've got a government-owned business that makes a loss, your net debt goes up, right? Your financial position goes down, doesn't show up in the headline cash balance either. So it gets painfully complex, and the complexity of it allows unscrupulous actors to be able to drive a truck through. Just one quick note on that. To his credit, Costello introduced a consistent budget reporting framework. Before that, people had changed it around every time they got in. Now, realistically, what that's ended up being is one statement in the budget that no one reads, but it is there, right? So weirdos and nerds like me can go and read it and untangle a lot of this data, but that's not what's actually reported in budget statement 3, which is, or on the summary that they give to the journalists. The journalists can't read a budget paper, right? So they read the summary. So you still get a bit of the games, but to his credit, Costello did add a requirement to have that. I think it's budget statement 7 or whatever it is. But one more thing, sorry, long rant. Sinclair says quite wisely, so look at the impact on debt. Which debt? There are just as many different measures of financial health of the state. So you've got gross debt, you've got net debt. That I don't think either of those are the correct one. I think net financial worth is the correct metric to look at, but you've also got net financial liabilities to look at. And then you've got to decide whether you factor in the state and local situation, which I would argue we do, because if any state goes bankrupt, clearly the feds are bailing them out, right? So if you want to look at the point at which we are getting close to a fiscal cliff, you need to factor in those dodgy state debts too. So
do you know how hard it is to explain to a journalist that if a state goes broke, that the feds will have to bail them out? They'll say, oh, no, completely different thing, and what have you. You say, are you nuts? Obviously, the feds are going to be bailing them out. But just before you carry on with your rant, just to get in a word in, my favorite number is the face value of the gross debt. That is how much has to get paid back.
But we do have financial assets as well, though. I mean, to the degree that we've got financial assets that are basically being held with the explicit purpose of being able to pay off future debts.
The only financial asset the Commonwealth government really has is the future fund. And that's already spoken for by superannuation debt of the Commonwealth government. The other financial assets they have are sillinesses that are carried at director valuations, and of course those directors are never going to go to jail. So I'm always underwhelmed by the argument we have got financial assets. Okay, we've got some gold in the mint somewhere. We've got bits and bobs. We could flog off the ABC for $1 billion or less. At the end of the day, the only thing that they've got is the ability to extract our money from us at gunpoint. That is the Commonwealth government's greatest asset.
Well, then you should be going further than those liabilities, because that gross debt is normally, if you're referring to gross debt, maybe you weren't. But gross debt is only the actual treasury papers. The government owes more than that. That doesn't include our super liabilities and various other things as well. So whatever number you think you have, add 300 billion to it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think you're backing Sink's point, aren't you, John? Because Sink was saying that super liability offsets the assets that you were talking about. So therefore,
don't give me that. That's political spin. That's like saying the Medicare levy goes to Medicare, right? I mean, we all know the proceeds of the future fund just goes into a big bucket of money. And so, well, I'm saying include both, right?
Yeah.
But they're not actually linked to each other. The size of the future fund is not linked to the size of our superannuation liabilities.
No, it's not our superannuation liabilities. It's those fat cats in Canberra's superannuation liabilities.
The government superannuation liabilities.
My super is not tied to the future fund. I wish it was, because if anything happened to my particular super fund, they're just going to let it fail. Whereas anything happens to the fat cat, the bureaucrat politician super fund, it's getting bailed out. You know this.
All right, so moot point, Sinclair. We'll never be allowed to retire. We'll be doing this for the rest of our life.
Aren't you a member of that Fat Cat super fund that Sinclair's talking about, John? I'm still PSS, I think.
You know that because you are as well, Gene. But yeah,
yes.
Just to clarify though.
I'm on with 2 parasites. What's this?
But just to be clear, that again, it's not linked to the future fund at all. The reason it's linked to it's linked to the government's ability to point a gun at your face and say, "Give me your money," and that's a power that most financial markets. Yeah, but financial markets put the lowest risk premium on that, right? I mean, that's why it's the lowest.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever I hear the story, we've got AAA rating and what have you, they just know we are unarmed and the government can stick a gun to our head and say, give us your money. That's what the AAA rating is measuring.
Which makes it remarkable that we don't always have the AAA rating, because I guess they are aware of the fact that eventually they can hit a Laffer maximum and start squeezing that goose too hard and just literally not be able to raise the money.
Yes. But nonetheless, that is a very powerful incentive. But the states can definitely go broke, and I wouldn't be surprised. Well, I mean, I kind of know the Northern Territory is broke, but they're not a state. I have views there. I kind of think the federal government has absconded from its responsibilities because the Northern Territory is not a state.
Yeah.
So they're in a different situation to, say, Victoria, where effectively we are broke.
Yeah, just on the point about whether the feds would bail them out, I think in an extreme situation, yes, I agree. But I think you'd see the states having to do the heavy lifting first, wouldn't you? Like Kennett did in Victoria in the 90s, like they must have done in South Australia after the SA Bank collapse. So I think the states will have to inflict a lot of pain on their taxpayers to try and get them out of the situation before the feds step in.
They will, but if you also remember back to the 1990s, Kennett had stuff to sell. So in addition to putting on household levies and all this sort of stuff, they were able to privatize a whole bunch of stuff. We don't have too much to privatize anymore. Now, the whole argument was that if you sold off the crown jewels, future governments would have to be more responsible because they would have to pay it back. That actually hasn't happened as we had hoped. It is problematic. The other thing that has happened that is more worrying is that for a long, long time, Australians used to be very economically literate. We used to worry about when government started spending money, we used to worry who's going to pay for it, how's it going to get paid, where's the money coming from. If you have a look at modern debates nowadays, nobody ever asks that question, because we all know where the money's coming from, the bond market. We're just going to borrow.
They don't know that, Sinks. They definitely don't know that.
We are just borrowing and borrowing like there's no tomorrow. And we've also lost the whole idea where government spending is now called investment. That happened under Wayne Swan, and nobody ever pulled him up on it. Well, no, not nobody, but he got away with it, and now they all get away with it. It is very problematic.
Yeah, they have co-opted some of the righteous words of economics that were supposed to be our domain. They've co-opted the word without co-opting the meaning, which makes it even harder for us to actually say what we're trying to say. Two quick points here. To some degree, this is commentary about how we think politics works. I tend to think Sinks' interpretation is correct, but it's contested in both senses. Would the feds step in? They don't literally have to. They could just have the states go through a lot of pain. But the issue is, look, depending on what is the political party in power federally and at the state level, could impact how that plays out. But if it was a sympathetic government at the federal level and the state level, once that government at the state level was starting to cause so much pain that we're going to lose the next election, I think politically the feds are going to step in. So that's one point there. In terms of economic literacy, I got a slightly different take to you there, Sinks. I don't think there was ever very much economic literacy. We've just changed our economic instincts. And I don't think these instincts came from deep learning. But people used to have this knee-jerk reaction of voting the bastard out if they ran too many deficits, like getting angry at debt and deficits. Those used to be F words, not D words. And I think to some degree, people's instinctive antipathy to those debt and deficit, to the D words, didn't come from deep learning. And to some degree, it was a knee-jerk reaction that wasn't quite technically correct. You could have some amount of useful debt in some situations, and they were just doing this sort of blanket rule. And so very sophisticated wankers showed up and said, oh, no, you're being too unsophisticated. You could have good debt. Now, their argument is true. but it's irrelevant because I don't think voters are ever going to have a sophisticated understanding of the nuances. They're going to have instincts, and their instinct against debt and deficit was a good thing for our country. So it wasn't technically correct in every instance, but it was a good instinct to have. And when they had that instinct, our political system worked better, and they've lost that. I don't think there is a political instinct now that says, oh no, if I have another deficit or the debt goes up, I'm going to lose some points in the next poll. No one thinks that anymore. We're now in the Dick Cheney period of Australian politics where they say debt doesn't matter. And I think it's reached Australia, unfortunately. And I think both sides of politics are starting to realize it, and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's what James M. Buchanan called the old-time fiscal religion, is that people had a dislike of debt and deficit. Now, this, as you say, this is a good thing. And that's what I kind of think of as being relatively economically literate, because the old-time fiscal religion got lost in, say, the United States, the United Kingdom, Western Europe, sometime in the 1980s. We've only lost this in the 2000s to the noughties, the 2010s.
You're getting some love in the chat there. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly.
And so is
John,
Wayne Swan here. Wayne Swan, the universe's greatest treasurer. Oh, there you go.
I think that was, I think that's sarcasm. John, can I just comment? Like, you were questioning whether the Australian public, the level of literacy, I think it was much higher in the 80s. Like, I remember, I mean, maybe just because I'm a few years older than you. I mean, partly that was because of, I think Keating was a very good communicator of economic issues. And I distinctly remember, I mean, there was that time when he hopped on, was it 7:30 or one of the shows, and actually explained the J curve with the exchange rate and how what would happen is the current account would first worsen because of the price impact, because that would immediately impact, and you'd have to pay more for your imports, but then eventually, because of what would happen, we'd be more competitive with our exports, and imports would be more expensive, the current account would improve. And people got it. It was quite extraordinary. And I think, and people were talking about it in the community. And, you know, Keating said that every galah and every pet shop's talking about microeconomic reform. So I think we did have a time in our history when we were more economically literate than we are now, or at least the average voter was.
Yeah,
I remain skeptical. I think we've always got a bias towards idealizing the past, and I suspect to some degree what happened is that the dumber echelons of society had literally no microphone back then. So now we hear them a lot more. The dumber echelons are certainly louder.
They run YouTube shows at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night.
Yes. I don't know if we've got dumber or dumber people have just got better access to communications now. So
can we come back to the debt? Let me put up an extreme hypothetical. What would happen if we had a state government in Australia suddenly say, we are broke, we can't squeeze any more money out of our taxpayers, and if the feds don't come to our aid, we are going to default on our debt? I don't think people have given that serious thought, because the only ever time in Australian history that somebody threatened to default, the state governor immediately fired the premier and said, that's a stupid thing to even say. But I could imagine we could be in a situation where a state government or a party running for office could actually say, well, you know, those international financiers, they were irresponsible to lend us all this money, and we are just going to say, screw it, we're not paying you back. That would be catastrophic, I would have thought, on all sorts of levels. So we kind of know, I think, at that point, the feds are going to step in. Now, how they step in might vary from government to government, and I suspect the way they would do it is they would play silly buggers with the GST and kind of hide it and massage it in that particular way. I think that's what would happen. I also think that would be a huge wake-up call for the Australian population, because I think our general population, their instinct would come back. They would be appalled by the idea that we would renege on a debt. Even though everybody else in the non-English speaking world does this on a regular basis, we would be appalled by this. And unfortunately, one of my other theories is you can't explain bad government to people. They have to experience it.
Yeah.
And I think we might be heading to a situation whereby a state government could hit the wall. And then all of a sudden, people are going to wake up and say, oh, my God, how did this happen?
That's the Argentina theory, where you can only have Javier Milei after you've had a bunch of Peronists first. So.
Look, I think where that risk is real is if we have another financial crisis. I think outside of that, I mean, the state governments, I think, can service their debt, but they will have to either, cut services or increase taxes to be able to pay for it. I don't see any problem, any risk of default at the moment, but in a financial crisis, if there's a rerun of 2008, then certainly. So in 2008, in 2009, the federal government did guarantee some of the state borrowing because the state governments were concerned and they were coming to us in Treasury. Like I remember meetings where, senior people from Queensland Treasury like Gary Ward and Stephen Rochester from QTC would come in and say, look, can you guys, borrow on our behalf, or could you, provide your AAA stamp on our debt? And then eventually the federal government did that because they were very concerned about, because they're a subnational government, they've got less visibility or less prestige or cachet on the international stage than the national government. And so in a financial crisis, they could be at risk of, not getting the funding that they need.
Mm.
So I'm gonna disagree with both of you, which makes it always much more fun. Like, your point there, Gene, about it requiring a crisis. Look, a crisis is going to come along eventually, especially with the way our leaders currently running the world. But even without a crisis, we have an aging population, and the states are required to pay for healthcare. Now, if they try to cut back on healthcare, in most states, there's an upper house with a bunch of recalcitrant state senators who will probably block any halfway sensible reform. So that's probably literally not going to be possible politically. There's very limited revenue heads, types of tax that the state governments can control. Most states now get most of their revenue from pocket money from Papa Canberra, right? Which is not a very good way to encourage responsible state behavior. They've got stamp duties. A lot of those are already way too high. They got payroll tax. It's going to be hard to squeeze much more out of that, given how high the tax rates already are in other areas. There's limited ability to raise tax. And again, their upper houses may not let them. Just that the natural low rate of growth of their tax heads, the tax types in the state level, with a high rate of growth of their health spending, and their lack of control over at least half their budget, makes it quite easy for me to believe that they will just sleepwalk to a debt crisis. And it's quite easy for me to believe those upper houses will just prevent difficult libertarian reforms. And then presto, you've got the collapse. I'll just disagree. I'll just disagree with you as well.
Increasing taxation is not a libertarian policy ever, John.
No, I'm saying to cut back on the spending, right? So they might be able to find someone to help them increase tax a bit. But I suspect they'll be running out of extra revenue from the tax increases because they'll be getting close to Laffer maximums on a lot of those taxes anyway. If they want to cut spending, that could work. Yeah. But without a libertarian control of the upper house of the state governments, they're going to struggle to pass that legislation as well. But where I'll disagree with Sinks is I think the obvious way they'll do the bailout is an IMF-style loan. We'll give you the money, but we will tell you have to do X, Y, Z. And if you don't do X, Y, Z, and then that's basically going to do is undermine our federalism. So that's a big coming challenge. Although I'll push back in another way. There is an upside to default. Yes, I agree with me too. I disagree with me too.
I think our federalism is a ship that sailed a long time ago.
Yeah, well, that's why we should abolish the federal income tax, and then we could get federalism back. But that's not the point.
Federal governments. What's wrong with you, John? Abolish the federal government.
Step by step. Okay, but anyway, the point you make about default. I don't know if I've put this out into a public domain before, so I could get in trouble if you guys have good responses here. But if they default, that means people will refuse to lend them money, and they have to live within their means. Good. I want to discourage people from lending money to governments. I want to punish people who buy bonds from governments. I want them to have a high risk premium so that governments have to think twice about borrowing, and maybe they can't borrow. And then if they can't borrow, all they can literally do at a state level, they can't print money. All they can literally do is live within their means. The end. Good.
Yeah. I have fantasized about this point too. But And I just love the idea that you just say, okay, we're not going to borrow more money and we're happy with that. That's not the international experience, though. If you have a look at the history of defaults, markets just keep lending money again and again and again to the same recalcitrants all the time. Yeah. So, yes, I would love the situation. You come to power and you say, well, we don't want your money ever again. We're going to default on you guys. But you just know the next couple of years, they'll be back again to lend you the money. Yes, I love the idea.
But then again, that's going
to work.
Then the vindictiveness in me wants those people to lose their money, right? If there's people out there continually lending money to governments when they shouldn't, then why are we crying crocodile tears when those people lose their money? Screw them. I prefer them to lose their money than me to suffer inflation.
Yes. So. Yes, no. So I'm not opposed to this. I just don't know. We have tried everything. We've tried starving the beast. We've tried, all these different things. My new one thing is, well, the end of the Monty Python movie where he has a wafer thin chocolate. Now I'm kind of thinking if we overfeed the beast and it blows up by itself, that actually might be a way to do things. But at the end of the day, the ability of governments to actually either raise tax revenue or borrow money or what have you is so astonishing that they just get away with it at every particular margin. We're always on a hiding to nothing until we can actually convince people that taxing money to spend on negative net present value projects is a bad idea. We don't tax ourselves into prosperity. Sure, there are some things that we do need to spend money on, national security, prisons, law and order. Okay, these are minimalist things. But almost everything else at some point, you say, do we really need that? And we need to be able to have this conversation without people saying, you're a Grinch who hates the poor. Because that is the argument that we are at now.
Whereas in reality, we hate everyone equally because equal opportunity, evil fascist. We've got one comment for you here. Sinks Ryan is agreeing with you fully, and in the WA perspective, calling for WA to secede. Although I imagine you'll now call him a communist for not wanting the WA government to also be shut down.
I am a huge fan of secession. I always think we should secede. People should always go. Now, the problem with the Western Australians is that they're so slack. So they can secede from the rest of the Commonwealth more or less by just saying they want to go. And in the 1930s, they did say they wanted to go and then didn't get their act together and ended up not leaving. So I always love chatting with Western Australians because, you say, you guys take too much of the GST, blah, blah, blah. And then they say, we will secede. I'll say, well, guys, go. We support you going. You would be better off seceding. People here in Victoria and New South Wales, we'd be better off too if Western Australia seceded. So maybe not South Australia, Tasmania and Queensland.
I was going to say the same.
Okay. But so they're not going to be better off. But I'm going to be better off. You're going to be better off. This is a Pareto optimal solution to this particular.
Well, let me say as well, I think South Australia and Tasmania in the long run would be better off not being welfare bludgers, right? They would have to learn to actually introduce policies that improve their own productivity, or be happy being poor. They have two choices.
To be fair to the South Australians, they have got a ton of uranium. Let me rephrase that. They have many tons of uranium. They are the Saudi Arabia of the world for uranium. And if they would love to dig it up and sell it on the world markets, and it's the rest of us that are stopping them. So the South Australians are sitting on, I would say, a gold mine. They're sitting on a uranium mine. They would be huge. And of course, the counter argument to them selling the uranium is people always say, oh, but if we sold it, we'd have to take it back. Do you know what a fantastic business that would be? We take back spent uranium and bury it in the Western Australian or the South Australian desert where nobody lives. It's geologically stable. You drill a hole into the ground, you drop the waste into it, and you charge people money for the next 50,000 years to look after their nuclear waste. So if we would actually just open our eyes to nuclear, South Australia would become rich overnight, and they would be making a ton of money selling the stuff and then storing the spent stuff. So it's actually the rest of us, to a large extent, who are keeping the South Australians poor. The Tasmanians have got no excuse. The Tasmanians are just too small to be a viable state in and of themselves. I would love to say they should join up with Victoria, but we don't want them because they've got no money. But definitely they should join.
What a glorious day, Sinks. This is a glorious day where I get to accuse you of being the communist if you think that state is too small. I mean, the states need to shrink all the way down to the household, surely. If you actually want the free market.
Well, you were the person telling me just a few minutes ago baby steps. The first baby step, the first baby step is we get rid of the Commonwealth government, Canberra. It's a foreign colonial power that sort of tells the rest of us what to do. Sorry, Gene, do you live in Canberra? But anyway,
no, I'm in Brisbane.
Oh, good. Oh, excellent. So we'd get rid of Canberra because more or less it's like a foreign colonial power telling the rest of us what to do and how to live our lives. So I would start off by getting rid of the Commonwealth government, have a free trade agreement with all the other states and territories. That would be the first step. And then have policy experimentation. And then maybe if we think Queensland's too big, we chop it in half or whatever the case may be. But certainly the current colonial configuration that was efficient for a 19th century economy with 19th century transport costs and 19th century communication costs is not viable for what we want for ourselves today.
Yeah, well, my version of a similar argument is take away all of the coercive taxing powers from the federal government. They can continue to pretend they exist, but only on donations from the states, and then have 30 states instead of 6. And then we would have a more vibrant jurisdictional competition, in my opinion. I think it would be easier to achieve if we let them pretend they still existed with donations, because then all the people that really think it matters, a defense force or something, can sleep tight and let us get away with the rest. Inshallah.
Yep, no. But anyway, so the important point of your story is that the states lost the Second World War, because before the Second World War, the states had income tax powers. Yeah. And we should actually go back to that situation, because the problem that we have, as you were saying before, is that the states have got all the spending and they can't match their taxing powers with their spending. So it pays them to spend more because it doesn't cost them on the income tax side, because they know they can always run to Canberra with sob stories and they will get the money somehow or the other. So you actually need to have some fiscal discipline that the same people who spend the money have to tax the money. And that's what we lost in Australia in the Second World War. But because we had that old-time fiscal religion, we didn't notice it was too much of a problem until the last 20 years or so. And then all of a sudden, we've moved away from having, economically literate, responsible people, dare I say, Paul Keating, Peter Costello, people like that, men of substance, who could actually explain things to the world, to the conga line of numpties we've had since 2007. They've all been, each one, just when you think it can't get any worse. No, they dig deep. And they come up with another bunch of numpties with stupid ideas. Dear God.
So there is something to be said for the fact that the iPhone came out in 2007, right? There's the people have embraced a different type of communication that seems to have dumbed us down, decreased our attention span, and allowed everyone to get involved in this ridiculously dumbed down debate. I had been told for years that when we used to talk economics, Sinks, we used to pontificate with lots of big words, and many people would say, look, you really need to dumb it down. And I got to say, after the last 2 decades, I reckon we've achieved that. I reckon it is well and truly dumbed down now, and maybe we need to start going back the other way. The dumbing has been achieved. But anyway, Gene, you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, at least Malcolm Turnbull did propose giving some of the income tax powers back to the states, but that was knocked back pretty quickly. I think Anastasia Palaszczuk from Queensland led the pushback, saying, well, we're happy with the current situation for the reasons you mentioned.
Of course, but the states are always going to be happy with it. I mean, the federal government can do it without asking the states, right? All they need to do is that the states are allowed to have an income tax. The reason they don't is the federal government currently says, we will give you billions of dollars of free money if you don't have a state income tax. So all the federal government needs to do is say, you can have a state income tax if you want now, and we're not giving you the billions of money. And if you like, we'll even help you coordinate the raising of it. But we're not giving you money for free. So you either say you've got a state income tax or just cut your budget. Those are your 2 options. The federal government can do that. The states will never call for it. I would love to see some good people get into state government and actually call for that. but you're
Yeah.
far more likely to get that from the federal Senate. That's the only place I've ever heard sensible calls.
Right.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull got that policy of the states would get back their taxing powers lasted for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I was so bitterly disappointed because I had high hopes for Malcolm Turnbull. He's a smart guy. And yet just didn't seem to achieve anything, sort of folded at the first sign of grape shot. Even if he was not going to go through, he could have humiliated the state governments for weeks, making them beg and plead and carry on that they didn't want this. But no, at the first sign of trouble, he said, oh, no, terrible.
Yeah, it wasn't blocked. He should go forward with the idea. Someone should go forward with the idea and lose if they're going to lose, or win if they can. And unfortunately with Turnbull, because I think you're right, there was hope for Turnbull, and he's great on some issues and terrible on others. And he chose to use all his political capital basically on climate boondoggles and other stupid shit fuckery. If he just focused on cutting corporate income tax and introducing school vouchers, both of which I believe he at least used to believe in, he might have been a very different prime minister.
And we also know his economics team. I mean, those are all smart guys.
Yeah, Alex.
And Paul. They were all really smart guys. They must have been pulling their hair out because they would say to Malcolm, "We're going to do this." He'd say, "Fantastic," And the first sign of trouble was, "Oh, no." So it was, he had a fantastic team.
Yeah. Just responding to Lyndon, it's been suggested a few times. The states don't want it because think of it from the states' perspective. If they had control over their own taxing powers, if they wanted to raise money, they would have to go to the public and say, I'm raising your taxes now, which is a much harder thing for a politician to do. Instead, they can say, it's not my fault, it's the federal government. Can I have more pocket money, please? That's why I refer to it as they all live off pocket money from Papa Canberra. And the way to make more money when you live off pocket money is to go to your authority figure and say, can I please have more pocket money? And that's basically the revenue strategy of most of our states, all of our states to some degree. So the states will never want it, but they don't have to have a say in the matter, right? I mean, the federal government doesn't have to keep handing them those grants, and the federal government doesn't have to continue banning state income taxes. They could just act, and the states would have to fall in line. Anyway, we've gone on for 50 minutes riffing off what you gave us there, Gene. So thank you. Look, the topic I did want to get into today, and don't know how much time we'll have for all of it, but the upcoming budget, there is already starting to be a bunch of leaks coming out of the government about what they may be doing. I think perhaps they had started talking and leaking about changing capital gains tax quite a while ago, and that topic has been ventilated quite a lot, I think, over the last couple of elections, indeed. And we could go back into that, especially if Sinks wants to add anything to that conversation. But the two things that have shown up more recently in the budget debate has been this consideration of a gas export tax, and the fact that the government, to their credit, seems to be at least taking some tepid steps towards getting NDIS spending under control, including, importantly, admitting that the structure is wrong. And I'll just give a little rant on NDIS and then throw to you guys to do anything you like on the budget. But I'd been somewhat happy that both sides of government had been admitting that NDIS spending was unsustainable. I was worried that they were going to say, therefore, we need to crack down on the bikie gangs. And of course, you need to, because the bikie gangs are running some rorts through the NDIS system. Yeah. Undoubtedly, there is some criminal elements involved. But that seemed like an easy cop-out that wasn't going to really solve the problem. I mean, you might save $1 billion, but when the spending is increasing by $5-10 billion per year, that's the increase each year. That was going to be a rounding error. And my concern was they weren't going to address the fundamental incentive problems you have of, if you tell a bunch of parents that you can have thousands of dollars of free money as long as you discover, little Johnny has some sort of mental health problem, suddenly a lot of little Johnnies are getting mental health problems. And who would have thought incentives change behavior? I don't believe that 1 in 5 of all boys in this country have suddenly come down with mental health problems. I believe that 1 in 5 parents of little boys have worked out that they can get paid for saying such. And there is some addressing of the incentives, and it looks like they are going to take some steps to address the incentives. Unless that is done, this is not a solvable problem. So, Gene, you were going to say?
Well, maybe this is being pedantic, but I'm not sure it's 1 in 5, is it?
It's 1 in 5.
It's 1 in
of
5,
boys,
is
right?
it?
1 in 5 boys.
Everyone. Not of everyone, not of all children, but of boys, 1 in 5, because one of the things you can get funded for is if your boy doesn't like sitting still for long periods of time.
Right. Okay. I didn't realize it was that high. I'd heard a figure like something like 1 in 7 or 1 in 8, but 1 in 5. Okay. Incredible.
That might be total children.
I think it's school age boys or primary school age boys or something along those lines.
Right.
It's 1 in 5 is the number. Okay, so are you going to rant first, Gene, or am I going to rant first?
Oh, you rant. You go.
Okay. All right. So the problem with the NDIS, it was a rort from the very beginning, because we were told at the time that Australia makes no provision for disabled people, which is simply not true. It's a bald-faced lie. What was happening is maybe Australia didn't, but the Australian states did. So each state and territory had its own disability program, and it was run at the state level. And the one thing we do know about states is they are pretty good at service delivery because that's their bread and butter. The other thing that we know is the Commonwealth government is rubbish at service delivery because that is not their bread and butter. So that's not what they do. So we came along, we had this idea that all of a sudden Australia is not doing anything about disability services, which is simply not true. We were, but there wasn't a national uniform approach because, surprise, we're a federation. We're not supposed to have national approaches. Okay, so that was the first thing. The next thing that happened was the NDIS was going to be an industry support scheme. That's what it really was. They had this idea that we were going to have entrepreneurs starting up companies that would be making hospital beds and wheelchairs and medical equipment for disabled people. And now let's also physically disabled people. That was the idea. So this was actually a manufacturing industry support scheme was the idea. Okay. And the feds were going to pump in all this money on top of the state money that was already going in. Of course, the states very quickly realized, well, gee, if the feds are pumping in money, we can take our money out. Okay. And then the next thing that happened was kids or parents of kids who did not have physical disabilities but have mental disabilities thought they were being left out. So they went to the courts. And the courts ruled reasonably enough that a mental disability can be as debilitating as a physical disability, which I think is probably true. And so they had to be included. Now we end up with a situation whereby, as John was saying, if you can get some doctor, you go doctor hopping, and you get some doctor to diagnose your kid being on the spectrum or something other as like this, you can get money for them. The state school system worked out that they could get extra teachers. Now, if you say to me there's a person who's rorting the government out of money because there's a perverse incentive, I can say, well, it's disgusting, but I understand this is how the world works. We now have the situation where the state governments are rorting the federal government out of money, which I think, gee, that's a little bit beyond the pale. That's actually quite shocking, really. So the whole scheme has turned out to be completely different from what was promised for reasons completely utter than what was promised. And I don't remember, John, in the bad old days when the Abbott government came to power, I was saying then, we can't afford the NDIS. In those days, it was not even anywhere near the numbers or the growth we've seen now. I was saying at the time, we can't afford the NDIS, we can't afford the NBN, we should shut them down until we can afford them and then go forward. Well, fast forward, 15 years or so, and it's a total schmozzle. We are spending more on kids on the spectrum than we're spending on national defense, which is a strange thing. Federal government shouldn't be spending any money on disabilities. This is genuinely a state government function.
Yeah.
So we have this complete schmozzle, and well, I'll come back to the budget after you've had your rant, Gene. Sorry.
Just one quick comment on that. If there has been this massive spike in autism, we should see that showing up in a massive spike for the vote for the Libertarian Party.
John.
Look, I don't want to comment on who your voters are, but okay.
John. Can I just co-sign, or I fully agree with what Sinclair's saying. I think NDIS is an example of a government program, which it's far outgrown what the original idea was or the original goal was. I was before I went to Federal Treasury, I was involved in workplace health and safety and workers' compensation policy in Queensland, and we were talking with the other states and about what eventually led to the NDIS. What was originally seen as the policy failure was the fact that you could have a catastrophic accident and wouldn't be covered by insurance. You'd fall through the cracks. Say you were diving at a creek and you ended up a quadriplegic. Well, and you can't necessarily sue anyone, and you're not covered by insurance. So there were people who were really buggered because they would have a very serious accident, life-changing accident, quadriplegic, and there's very little money to look after them. And so that was what was originally seen as the policy failure. I mean, that Sinclair's right. There were existing supports. Maybe you can argue that it wasn't sufficient and NDIS is more generous. But look, I mean, there's scarcity, right? We've got scarcity of resources. We need to allocate them in a way that makes sense. But yes, the original policy failure was to help out the people who are catastrophically injured and weren't covered by insurance. They've sort of fell through the cracks, and yet it's morphed into this $50 billion scheme. It's just quite extraordinary what's happened. I've just been blown away by it.
Yeah, it's positive to see that nearly everyone now, including the mainstream hacks, are admitting that something needs to be done. And look, we'll see what's actually proposed and how effective it is, but it seems like they're trying to carve off more of these non-acute conditions getting into the system, talking about potentially bringing down the number of people who are eligible. But I've got to say, both of you guys, in talking about this, have suggested an alternative path that we could have gone down. So there's 3 alternative paths we could have gone down. We could have just listened to Sinks and abolished government. But if that wasn't going to be the path, then if the states were already doing it and the concern was there was not enough money, block grants to the states. I mean, ideally, give the states back their taxing powers, as we discussed before. But if we're just trying to isolate each issue, one on their own, if the issue was insufficient money, the states already had a system, block grants to the states, and the states continue with their system. So that would have been a more obvious, direct solution. The downside to that is the federal politicians can't take credit and get reelected by campaigning on, look what I've done. The other potential solution here, and this goes from what you were saying, Gene, you pointed out a potential issue. Some people, you could argue what you described was a situation of some people being underinsured.
Yes.
If that was the, to solve a problem, you first have to correctly identify it. If that's the correct identification of the problem, then they're governed. I don't want compulsory insurance, but a more direct thing to do there would be to have a national disability insurance scheme that is actually an insurance scheme instead of pretending it's an insurance scheme. I hate how they keep doing this. They keep bastardizing words so that no one knows what they mean. They could have just said, all right, here's a compulsory insurance scheme you have to have, everyone. It's $200 a year. I'm sorry, you have to pay that. If they want to be nice, they can then give us a $200 voucher, or I would suggest a $150 voucher so that people have skin in the game. And then you could have covered that gap in insurance. But instead, we've made this massive boondoggle where all of the incentives are, please go and spend more money. I mean, I like you were saying or hinting at before, Sinks, I don't really blame the average punter rorting the system. The government created a system with incentives to be rorted. Fix the incentives. Don't blame the punter.
No, but I blame a lot of the dodgy providers. I mean, this is one of
they're
the
following their incentives too.
The organised crime has figured out this is a good way to make money because you get this guaranteed income stream from the government.
But the whole problem is, if you kind of think if criminals can work out how to rort systems, how stupid are the rest of us by just going along and actually saying, well, yeah, that's okay. But we see it everywhere. So we now hear criminals are rorting the NDIS, criminals are rorting the tobacco market. There's now stories that criminals are rorting the alcohol market. Is there anybody actually acting legally anymore? And this is the problem with the government, because the more laws, the more crime, or the more fraud, or whatever it is, the more corruption that you have. Well, that's what we're seeing. I mean, we are legislated and regulated to within an inch of our lives, and yet we have these criminals running rampant in our society.
And I think a lot of what people call rorting of the NDIS, actually could kind of fit within the current rules. I mean, the rules are so stupid at the moment that you can follow the rules and really rort the system. We can find a few criminals, but if you crack down on the criminals, you have not fixed the system, because you can exist within the rules in a ridiculous way, charging 300% markups, and it's within the rules.
Yes. Yes.
What about the gas tax, gents? Well, Gene, I already know what you think. So, Sinks, should we put a 25% export tax on gas exports in Australia?
No. I mean, what are these
only
guys gonna do?
20%, or
A good tax is an old tax. And my view is more or less we should put in place a tax system which raises revenue for the purchase of public goods and services that we want to provide the community and what have you, and leave them in place. Because if we put on a gas tax now because the price of gas is very high, how are we acting any differently from behavior which the government is currently prosecuting Coles and Woolworths for price gouging? Well, the government is saying, oh, no, it's us price gouging now, not those evil supermarkets. Well, it's just all rubbish. You set a tax regime for the purposes of encouraging investment and raising revenue, and you stick with it. The other thing is, why doesn't it occur to any of those numpties that we are actually sitting in Australia on massive reserves of oil and gas that we are forbidden by our own government from mining? And do you know how few people know this? So I was speaking to my house cleaners this morning, and they were carrying on about, oh, the evil Trump, we're not going to run out of oil and petrol and what have you. I actually said to them, you realize that we could actually be mining or drilling for gas and oil here in Victoria. And they said, oh, no, do we have gas reserves? I said, absolutely, but the government won't let us actually mine them. So rather act to grow the pie as opposed to try and tax more out of the existing pie. This isn't rocket science.
Yeah.
Well, our gas extraction at the moment is orders of magnitude higher than our gas consumption. I mean, we are a powerhouse of a gas exporter at the moment. But the same could be true for oil, but we just have not been hunting for it. And definitely, you mentioned before, uranium is one of the most obvious ones.
Well, here in Victoria, I think it's even illegal to prospect for gas and oil. I mean,
I approve of that. I want to make life as difficult as possible for Victorians. I think that's
what? Well, I think the state government's already doing that, John. I mean, and yes. I mean, you see what happened on the what's that main street in Port Melbourne with youth crime is out of control in Victoria. I mean, yes. I don't know why everyone's not leaving the place. Anyway, I mean, we're lucky we're up in beautiful Queensland where.
Gene, I think a lot of people have been leaving the place. That's why their house prices aren't going up as much as showing up in house prices.
Not quite. Can I just say, despite the government's best efforts, Melbourne is still a beautiful place to live. And the government are trying really hard and doubling down on making that not true. The challenge with house prices...
Spin on that. You could just say they're trying to get house prices down by driving people out, leaving more houses.
They are. I mean, let me just tell you right now, the current state government's policy on housing is making housing astonishingly affordable by destroying landlords as a business opportunity. So if you're a landlord in Victoria right now, you are absolutely swamped with regulations and what you can and can't do. They're all selling. And moving to Queensland, no doubt, driving down house prices, destroying the value of the middle class. I mean, do you think I want the value of my single largest asset after superannuation to be destroyed so that some young person can buy it? No, I want to sell it at the best price I can possibly get. I mean, but nonetheless, the current state government's housing policies, by destroying landlords, are driving down house prices. I mean, this is the affordability we keep hearing about. So why are people unhappy? I don't understand.
I'm going to let that go through to the keeper, Gene. Firstly, just a comment on your first point. This is an interesting thing for people to consider. If the idea is you increase tax when an industry is doing well, is the quid pro quo that we cut the tax below the previous rate when the industry is doing less well, or give them a subsidy? I mean, there is a question for how that sort of a two-winged system on the tax system could work. But that aside, Gene, what are your comments on this idea of a gas export tax?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm concerned about the same issues Sinclair is that, I mean, it's not a good look to the rest of the world if we impose this after they've already made the investment. I mean, they've taken on a lot of risk. I mean, look, maybe the PRRT, it hasn't been very effective. It hasn't raised a lot of revenue. I think that's fair to say. look, it is going to be raising more in the future as these the capital costs are they're expensed and they're no longer reducing that tax liability. So yeah, it just looks like government taking advantage just to fund more bad spending. I'd like to see them get the spending under control so they don't need all of this additional tax. So perhaps PRRT was badly designed in the first place, but it doesn't justify this 25% export tax. I mean, as you and I know, Queensland has quite, it seems to have a reasonable gas royalties regime here, and so it wouldn't make sense to then go and impose that on the Queensland exporters. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of what's been proposed by David Pocock in particular. And I think the federal government, it would probably be, even though this is appealing and it would give Jim Chalmers a lot more money to play with, I think they'll be very cautious about doing anything too radical, because it really could affect our reputation as a sound investment destination worldwide.
Yeah, so a couple of comments I have on this idea. Like as Gene hinted at there, the Queensland has a royalty system. Going back a step, to do this topic justice, you have to draw a sharp distinction between the concept of onshore gas and offshore gas. And I think there's a bunch of complaints you can make about how the PRRT works, the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax. But just to be clear, the PRRT is the way we tax our offshore gas. It has nothing to do with onshore tax.
And it's a federal tax. It's not a state tax.
It's a federal tax, yes. We've got the onshore gas that pays the government through state royalties. And nearly every criticism that is made of our current system is totally irrelevant to what's happening with onshore gas. Right? All of the arguments apply to the offshore gas with PRRT, even then a bit dodgy in the arguments. But note what they've done. It's a bit of sleight of hand. They say the PRRT is a bad tax, so we should replace the PRRT with a different thing. All right, we could have that discussion. And then they want to apply it to the onshore gas as well, which is just ridiculous. Just starting point here, let's just rule that out as a ridiculous non-starter. If you're complaining about PRRT, talk about changing the PRRT. But the state, especially the Queensland government, actually has a pretty sensible, of course we should get rid of all tax, but putting that aside, a fairly sensible regime for the way they deal with gas, right? The royalties, they say they own it, and this is their system for selling the gas. It already has, people talk about with the PRRT, we want an export tax. The Queensland royalty system has an implicit export tax. The royalty is higher if you export the gas. The royalty is lower if you don't. So we've got that built into the Queensland system. Then on the PRRT, some people talk about, well, we want it to be a super profits tax, so we get more if gas prices go up. That's already the system that exists in Queensland. If the gas price goes up, the royalty goes up. And the Queensland system is already, for the last couple of years, paying more in royalties on that onshore gas than the PRRT, even though the amount of gas is less than half.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the Queensland system is working perfectly. Also, if you have a problem with it, if you think the royalties should go up or down, the solution is to approach the state government, which legitimately has the claim on that revenue head, on that type of tax, and make the case to them. You should increase your royalty. You should decrease your royalty. There's no case here where the federal government should step in, screw up the state's royalty system, double tax these industries. That should just be a non-starter.
You're missing the obvious point here, is that none of those dollars end up in Canberra. So therefore, that's not really an Australian tax, is it? It's just a Queensland tax. And this is the rot that was set in with the Henry Tax Review, if you remember back in 2008, 2009, wherever it came, when they introduced that the mining tax of 2010. The whole argument was that they wanted a federal tax as opposed to a state government tax, but they couldn't force the state governments to actually get rid of their particular taxes, so they were building it on top. And all the stupidity that came in of the Henry mining tax was this differential between state and federal government tax revenue. So the argument isn't that Queensland's got a good tax. The argument is that Canberra's not getting the money.
Yes, well,
that's the story.
That's going to be the argument when Obviously, also there's the political story here. They just need the money to be able to spend the money in Canberra so they can get the credit in Canberra as well. Look, my pushback on that, where we're having a long enough argument with beers in hand in a pub, is that I actually like the competitive federalism and jurisdictional competition. It's the only thing that I think, literally the only thing that can keep government in check. I don't think democracy can. Sorry, Gene, we had that argument plenty of times. I don't think wishing and holding hands and kumbaya can. Literally the only thing, in my opinion, that can keep government in check is jurisdictional competition. So I want these powers decentralized. So that would be the pushback there. But anyway, one other thing to note about this campaign to have a 25% export tax is all of the predictions done on top of it make the very bold assumption that if you change people's incentives, they will not change their behavior. Yeah. Which, just spoiler, is wrong. A technical term is bullshit. We know this, right? I mean, it's a simple enough thing. This is a tax on capital income, not labor income, which has a lower behavioral response. Capital income has a very high behavioral response because you've got no emotional connection to that capital investment. If you needed to make 10% to make the investment work and it was earning you 11, you make the investment. You tax that enough, and so now it's only making 9% or 4% or 0 or negative. You don't make the investment. And we know pretty much for certainty that there are a bunch of marginal projects, especially in Queensland, where there are literally thousands of coal seam gas projects, ranging from barely profitable or not profitable up to quite profitable. And if you increase the tax, you're going to tip a bunch of those marginal projects below the return point. They won't make the investments. They won't happen. And you might say, oh, boo-hoo, who cares about them? Well, then you can't tax them. Right? You can't tax a thing that you've taxed out of existence, or at least you can't get revenue from a thing that you've taxed out of existence. Just ask the government about tobacco excise, right? So those are my two bugbears here. Look, I actually think there's a case to reform PRRT. I think the PRRT system is not the way I would go about taxing our resources. That is the one element they have that I think any good argument has to have a hint of truth, because it has to register with people somewhere. And I think that's where they've got their hint of truth. The PRRT is not perhaps designed ideally. But then the rest of this argument about, let's assume people never change their behavior. Let's just go and then apply an extra tax onto a Queensland industry that's already got a tax system that seems to be working properly. That's where I'm calling bullshit. And I see the comments. I'll get to the comments in there back and forth. But RDub is saying, why don't we just double tax them? But I see that, RDub. I'll get to it when we do the Q&A. No pushback there, fellas.
No. I think the PRRT is a tax design that came out of a PhD thesis at the Australian National University.
Is that true?
Yes, I think that's my understanding, yes.
Look, I don't necessarily hate the concept.
I'll tell you off air who the author of the PhD thesis is.
I've got an idea for how I'd change it, but I'm not going to say it because I don't want to give anyone ideas. And if they go about changing it the way you
would reduce the rate to 0. Yes, we understand.
Well, of course, abolish all tax. Abolish the federal government, and there's no PRRT. Things you had the solution at the very beginning of this show. All right. Well, that's so I guess looking forward in the budget, keep an eye out for those two things. The gas tax, I don't think will go ahead. The NDIS cuts, hopefully some version will go ahead.
Can I just jump in there? I think the NDIS talk of the taxation, talk of the changes will allow them to bank savings in the budget, even though they don't necessarily have a plan to deliver those savings. Yeah. So I think this is a very cynical ploy to make the spend look smaller in the budget papers, as opposed to actually delivering a smaller actual budget. And so I would have thought that they shouldn't be allowed to bank those budget savings until the legislation at least is in place.
Well, I think the legislation will pass, because I don't imagine the Liberals will get in the way of NDIS reform. But yes, they are allowed to bank it before it passes.
Yes, I would not allow them to bank anything until the legislation is actually passed. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what shenanigans is going to occur. And we've seen this happen before. So I would definitely be saying I'm taking this view that the party of the welfare bludger is saying we are going to crack down on bludging is a bit too rich for my blood right now. So I would like to see the actual legislation, the actual costings, and then have it go into the budget, because then it will come up as a policy failure. You know, in that statement where they show you, oh, things happened in the world, why our budget blew out, and policy failures, why our budget blew out. It would come up as a policy failure and not as just some random event that happened in the world. There would be at least some accountability. So I'm not trusting them on the NDIS changes until they actually happen.
So for those looking through a budget, looking for the section on policy failure, they don't call it that, understandably. Look for the section on parameter variations, and that's where...
Yes, that's what it's called. That is one of the best parts of the budget, parameter variations. Because I know, you know, a lot of journalists, they will start off, they say, oh, the economy is going to grow at this and inflation is going to be that and what have you. Those numbers are complete rubbish. You've actually got to look at the Appendix 1 and the parameter variations. That's where the real stuff is.
Yes, and the policy changes, the total impact on the budget of policy changes. But anyway, we will be covering the budget when it comes out. It is the second Tuesday of May. We'll probably have more to say before we get there. But look, with time ticking by, let us move on. I see the comments coming through. We'll get there in a second. The last thing we do, and we've already started touching on this with the earlier conversation, but the last topic we get into on this show is we look at the topic of the newsletter that came out from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. If you get those newsletters, you would have received it today. If you don't get it yet, please go and sign up on Substack, Oz Taxpayers. That's austaxpayers.substack.com. You can sign up for free. It's one email a week, so we don't inundate your inbox. But that does help us out if you could do that. What was this week's email? It was about the news you may have seen already. This week was the 20-year anniversary of when Costello paid off our net debt back in 2006, near the end of the Howard Costello years. In my opinion, the Howard and Costello years are a bit of a mixed bag, but there were some good parts, and I think this is one of the clear positives. They got net debt down to zero by running, I think it was 9 out of 10 budget, or 9 out of 11 budget surpluses, something like that. There was a lot of budget surpluses in a row.
That sounds
they sold
right.
a few assets as well, but there was a lot of budget surpluses able to get that debt down, the net debt down to zero. Not the gross debt. Sinks would have been unimpressed with that, but they did get the net debt down to zero. Since the next year, basically, the next year they were voted out of office. You know, in that year, 2006, Costello warned that if we take our eyes off the ball, this can be undone quickly. The next year, a different government came in. The year after that, back into deficit, started ranking up the debt. And now we have net debt, I think, going up to 600 or 700 billion. I mean, these numbers are hard to wrap your mind around. If you're a normal human, you're not dealing billions, right? We deal in thousands, or your kids, you deal in tens or hundreds, and then we get to thousands and hundreds of thousands, maybe a house worth a few million. And then
$6,000 million. That's the word it's right.
Yes.
6,000
I'd like to,
yeah.
6,000 thousands. I mean, it really starts to change people.
$600,000 million is the amount of money.
600,000 million, yeah. I think it makes more sense to talk everything in millions because people get abstract in billions. Like, it's easy to trick a person listening quickly. Oh, this was 300 million. That was only 2 billion. 300, 2, it's billion, illion, trillion. It's all, to us normal people, they all just sound like big number, right? It's code word for big number. But this is a very big, we're getting up to $1 trillion, right? So there's a lot of coverage now about debt sneaking up to the $1 trillion mark. You know, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Pretty soon you're talking about big numbers. So in the newsletter, we put that little graph showing how, you know, we had debt go down a bit and then go up to these astronomical levels. And then I pointed out that, you know, debt doves would respond quite fairly, saying, yeah, but that doesn't factor in population growth, you know, inflation. Fair enough. We have those numbers. We can look at real per capita. So adjusted for inflation, adjusted for population. And again, it shows the same problem, right? That the average debt, the real debt per person has gone from, it used to be about, was it a couple of thousand, went down to zero because Costello got rid of it. And now it's up to over $15,000 per person and trending pretty consistently the wrong direction. Well, then you have the other response saying, well, this level of debt, some debt can be acceptable. True. This level of debt is sustainable. And that is also true. And this is why, and the third concern, we have urgent problems here where people's wages aren't going up, but prices are. The economy has had a productivity slump. We've had a lost decade of no productivity growth, the last 10 years, because that's how long a decade is. We've got urgent problems here that are showing up in the way we're trying to live life or failing to live life. And these are urgent concerns. And you're saying this abstract government graph is going the wrong direction. And these other boffins are saying that it's sustainable. So why should I care? And there's a lot of truth to those points. And this is the trickiness with the debt issue, is it is important, but not urgent. And you may have experienced this in your life. Your attention gravitates to what's urgent, even when it's unimportant. And important things that are unurgent can be left on the back burner for a long time to keep getting worse slowly until the house burns down. So it is one of these slow burning issues. The analogy I like to use is walking towards a cliff. Right, so we're walking towards a debt cliff, but just imagine walking towards a cliff, and we are still quite a bit away from that cliff. We're not on the edge yet. So could we take another step towards that cliff? Sure. And note, every step towards the cliff's edge causes very little damage to you. But that last step, when you fall off, that can be disastrous. And so you've got this issue where each step as you get closer doesn't seem like you're getting closer to danger because every step is safe until that last step, which you really don't want to take. And so the argument goes, well, we could take a few more steps. We're not at the edge yet. What's the problem? Some truth to that, except for the fact we don't know where the edge is. That's the trick. There is no hard science to this. We don't know. It's not exactly 80% of GDP or gross debt of 140% of GDP. We don't know where it is. There is a cliff's edge. We know that. We don't know where it is. So the analogy here is walking towards a cliff's edge, blindfolded. But it's worse than that because the government doesn't have exact control over the level of debt. There are things outside of their control that are constantly going up and down, and crisis can come along. So this is like walking towards the edge of a cliff. You know it's there, you know it's dangerous, but you're walking towards it blindfold and drunk. Now, we may not be at the edge yet, but there's a bloody good case that we should stop stumbling that way. And that's my point. I agree. This is not a Chicken Little moment. This is not to pull your hair out, light yourself on fire. The current level of debt isn't a disaster, but the level of trajectory is pretty unmistakable for the last 20 years. And what we've got in front of us is an aging population with a shrinking number of working age people being asked to pay for ever more health, aged care, and pensions to a growing cohort of retirees. And then other government spending pressures, defense spending, NDIS spending. And you don't think governments are going to promise to spend more money every election? So we've got a lot of these spending pressures at the same time that debt's already trending the wrong direction. This is a concern. It is an important but non-urgent concern. And because it's non-urgent, people don't need to feel like they don't need to pay attention. So it falls to wankers like us to occasionally wave a flag and say, oi, you do need to worry about this stuff long term. It is fixable. Right? It is a perfectly fixable problem. It's been fixed before. We have time. Costello's done it before. A sufficiently economically literate and courageous political leader could change direction, wind back on the government's overspending, start running budget surpluses and pay off the debt or pay down the debt. It doesn't need to be zero, but pay down the debt to a safer level. It is doable. Yeah. We just need different political leadership. So to any politicians watching this, I'm talking about you.
Yeah, John, can I just jump in there? I think largely I agree with you. So we wouldn't pay it down to zero. And indeed, Peter Costello didn't pay it down to zero. We kept $50 billion of bonds on issue so that we had because they had in demand in the market and they, set benchmark interest rates. So we had zero net debt. So we had assets matching the 50 billion at least. And then we grew above 50 billion in assets and had negative net debt, which was quite extraordinary. Now, one of the points I'd make is that to the extent that borrowing has not been on, for good purposes. It has not gone into, hasn't been good debt, so to speak, and we've invested in quality assets, and we've just been funding, operating deficits, then, we just end up with additional interest we've got to pay. And, that's costing our budget, and it means we have to have taxes higher than otherwise, or we can't fund, good services. So I think it is still an issue. It's just, I agree, it's not an emergency, but it is costing us, and maybe we don't notice it, but our level of services is not going to be as good as it could be. Our taxes are going to be higher than otherwise. So I think it's an issue, but yeah, I agree, probably not an emergency at this stage. But yeah, look, I fully agree with everything you're saying. I'd just like to add that additional point about the interest and how costly that is, particularly if you haven't invested in good quality assets.
Yeah, there's another point on top of that as well, which I think there's multiple arguments against running a budget deficit. One is the debt issue that I talked about before, but I'd say that's important but not urgent. And the other one is just the efficacy of the spending in the deficit.
Yeah.
That's where I normally come to the issue of, are you actually getting value for money that exceeds the cost of the interest payments on top of the price? But also, and I think this is actually the bigger cost, when you're running a deficit, you borrow the money. If you borrow it domestically, then that's probably because our banks are just printing the money, right? They're creating new credit. That's how you get inflation. And to stop the inflation, our interest rates go up. We end up paying for it that way. More often, we get the credits, or actually 50-50, we get the credit from international finance, which puts upward pressure on our exchange rate and hurts our exporters. So like deficits, I think, have a range of different problems. One is they just cost money, and you got to pay for it with future tax and interest. The other one is it puts up debt. So you take another drunk, blindfolded step towards that cliff. And the third one is it actually ends up showing up elsewhere in your economy as a negative, right? You get an increase in G, but a decrease in NX for the economic wankers out there. So it actually doesn't even work. So that's, yes, I agree with your point. I just got to demarcate those three different arguments.
Yeah,
and,
fair enough.
Sinks, any thoughts on debt situation? Is it all no problem?
Many years ago, I wrote an op-ed for the Australian Financial Review where I made the argument that in the absence of actual war or a massive economic crisis, it is a moral failing on politicians to run a deficit. It is irresponsible on so many levels that our old-time fiscal religion, our old instinct that debt and deficits were somehow bad, that the treasurer would have to stand up and be ashamed of himself while he was explaining to people on that Tuesday evening in May why we were having a deficit when he didn't have to. Now, you could always accidentally have a deficit after the fact, but to actually plan to have a deficit says to me that there's something profoundly wrong with what they are doing. And I hope that we will soon get back to the situation. I also have a bit of a mea culpa. When the Howard Costello government was about to destroy our debt situation, they actually had a consultancy around. So they went around the country and they asked people, should we not only just pay down all our debt, should we shut down the Australian government debt market? Just have no debt on issue at all.
Yeah.
And the argument against that comes from the fact that a lot of corporations, when they calculate their cost of capital, build off the government rate as the risk-free rate. Yeah. And so one of the arguments that I made was that you actually did need to have some government bonds so you could have a risk-free rate. And some of my colleagues made the submission that you could come up with a synthetic risk-free rate. And my argument was, well, you can't fake market prices. So we did actually still need to have a debt market so governments would create the risk-free rate that everybody else rips off. And that is an incredibly responsible economic argument which I made over 20 years ago. And I have to say, in retrospect, I'm sorry. I apologize to the citizens of Australia. We should have shut down the government bond market, whole as bowlers, lock, stock and barrel, and made it incredibly difficult for when Rudd and his friends came along and just blew up the achievements of the Howard Costello government on debt. We should have shut down the market there and then and said to the corporations, well, you're going to have to come with plan B for the risk-free rate. Because I actually think that debt is I agree, it might not be urgent, but it's a slow-acting poison. Public debt is a terrible thing compared to, say, private debt. Private debt, we all understand. You need to smooth out and what have you. And sometimes you can make an argument for public debt. We're going to have some mega infrastructure project. Now, why we've got this mega infrastructure project, I don't know. But in principle, we may need to smooth out government spending or smooth out government revenue through the use of debt. That is not what's been happening these last 20 years. We've been borrowing money to finance consumption. We are taking the food out of our grandchildren's mouths to feed ourselves. And I kind of think that is economically irresponsible. So, yeah, it's not urgent, but gee, it's pretty important to get something done.
You said that there should be a rule against having any sort of budget deficit. It immediately raised in my mind of which budget balance. As we discussed before, there's at least four.
I am a huge fan of cash accounting for government. Money on the barrelhead. You can see the cash. All these other things are playing silly buggers. One of the things the Howard Costello government did do when it came to power it came in 96, but I think in about 97 or so, they had an inquiry. Should government budgets be on an accrual basis, like accounting for organizations, or should they be on a cash basis? And I always argued cash. You can see the money. Governments have to put money down on the table where you can see it. Because otherwise they will lie to you. And of course, are you going to not trust the government? Why would they lie to us? They are our representatives. Well, actually, it doesn't work like that. But they trade into our trust and naivety very often to get away with what we now see are these massive financial bondoggles. And it's problematic. But you can't explain bad government to people. They have to experience it. So unfortunately, at some point, we are going to hit the wall. And everybody's going to say, oh, my God, how did this happen?
And then they'll say, I remember that podcast I went on with those three funny economists. They told me this would happen. I got some bad news for you, Sinks. The underlying cash balance doesn't include change of value in financial assets. And as Gene and I like to talk about, the government of both persuasions, but especially Labor, is getting quite good at working out how to introduce their policy off budget. Most of their climate boondoggles are being done off budget.
You see, that shouldn't be allowed. There should be nothing. If a government spends if the government spends a penny, it's got to be in the cash balance. That would be how I would run the budget.
Yeah.
Well, the issue is if they're saying they're corporatizing a business, that business then is a separate legal entity according to them once it's corporatized. But then while being corporatized, it still has to follow government instructions. So you're able to get away with getting what that government does.
John, if you genuinely believe that story, you should have the words "I am an idiot" tattooed on your forehead.
I was thinking of doing that, actually.
I fully understand they try this separate legal entity rubbish. It is the government. It's one big amorphous blob, and they are the same people. They organize themselves in different ways. I understand this. I mean, the same way we have all these independent agencies. No, they're not.
Well, the other thing is they do actually. There is actually this balance reported. The issue is that no media reports on it because the government decides what they emphasize. Thanks to Costello, these numbers are reported. They do report the public sector, which includes all government-owned businesses, right? That is something that's reported somewhere on page 56D in Appendix 83.1 on, like you have to have a PhD to find the website.
It's in Appendix 3.
I think it's actually Budget Statement 7, but it's like the point, and it's hard to read.
Appendix 3 of Budget Statement 1. Appendix 3 Budget Statement 1. The big document that comes out. It's got 7 statements. You're talking about the 7th statement. It's in the Appendix 3 of the big number 1. PB1 when you download it off the ears. When you download it. Not that I'm admitting on budget night that I sit in front of my computer in my pajamas downloading budget statements. Maybe somebody else does that.
I still do those things, yes. I worked in budget policy when I was there. There's 9 statements in Budget Paper 1, and the 7th statement is the one that Costello required there to be. And all the states also have that, so you can compare like with like by following the GFS standards. But it's there. But the point is, even once it's there, if no one ever talks about it except me, and my audience isn't quite as big as Joe Rogan, if the mainstream media and all the people with the big microphone don't talk about it, the number can be written down. Who cares, right? So we have a job now to convince you, dear listener, to also try to hold the government to account with a better budget balancing, to actually listen to the headline cash balance, perhaps, is what Sinks is.
Chris Richardson's good on this. I think Chris is doing good work on this and trying to raise public awareness of it. So maybe we should get Chris on the show in the lead up to budget. Well,
the other thing we need is, I don't know if there's much hope of saving the coalition anymore, but to the degree that there is, they need to get much better at this. Because it seems to me that Labor runs rings around them in terms of working out what to include in the budget, where, and how to report it, and how to get away with a lot of shenanigans, right? So we need to convince whichever alternative government may replace the current government, whether it's Liberal One Nation or some mix or alternative to the lot of them, that they need to bring us into the room. And if not us, then someone else, to have them understand the best ways to exploit the system or shut down the system.
But of course, John, we'd be happy to talk to whoever is in government if they want to chat with us.
Oh, absolutely. So when the Greens win, we'll talk to the Greens as well. I was just going to say, one other tricky part, and Sinks, you're right to draw the distinction, and I know you drew it with a seemingly a heavy heart. Government spending to just pay for recurrent spending, right? The stuff they're handing out, vis-a-vis government investing in a piece of infrastructure that may potentially pay off. And that's the same distinction you should have in your own life. You shouldn't go into debt to buy more baked beans or marshmallows, but you could go into debt to buy an asset that was actually going to give you a return. Your house is an obvious one. It's a tractor for your business. So the quintessential piece of capital, the tractor.
A chicken one, perhaps.
Yes,
absolutely. John.
So that distinction in your life also exists to some degree with the government. Now, the states actually, they report the net operating balance, which means they are only trying to balance recurrent spending. They don't even include capital spending in what they're trying to balance. The federal government, to their credit, does also then include their capital spending. But one thing to note with this capital spending, when people justify it, because I'm very sympathetic to the idea of having some debt for good capital spending. The government has got into the habit of calling a lot of things capital spending that aren't really capital spending. And they've got into a habit of saying, if it's capital, then we can justify debt. No, you can't justify debt on just anything called capital. I have a small farm here, 2 acres. It doesn't make sense if I bought 56 tractors. That would all be capital. It would be bloody dumb. There would be no rate of return on 56 tractors on a 2-acre farm. Right. So then the government's got this idea now that as long as they have a social rate of return on their capital, they can justify debt for it. We need to call out that bullshit. The social rate of return is the recurrent spending side. That can't be done with debt. If you want to justify debt for a capital investment, the capital investment has to have a reasonable prospect at actually paying off with real money, not theoretical or hypothetical money, real money that you use to pay off the debt that you took out to buy the asset. So that's one little asterisk I want to put on that.
What you could do, though, is you could make all those so-called government investments, put them into the future fund. And so that would actually contaminate the assets that the politicians and public servants were going to be earning in future. So you say to the future fund, it's yours. And if it works out, you can sell it at a profit. Or if it doesn't work out, well, the people who made these decisions are actually going to wear that.
As I said before, it's not hypothecated. It's not hypothecated. If the future fund goes bad, then they just simply top up their super payments out of general revenue. So,
well, it's going to be fun to watch, but yes. Wait, guys,
John, can I just say what you? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, what I was going to say, John, is what you were talking about is the policy that the Queensland government had from the Joe days through to the Goss government, Borbidge, early Beattie, and that was abandoned by Anna Bligh when they went on the huge spending spree in the 2000s on all the, on the recycled water plant that we don't, that turned out to be a complete white elephant, and the desal plant that we hardly ever use. So we had that policy. You'd only borrow for economic infrastructure. This is something Leo Hilscher emphasized, that, because the social infrastructure doesn't necessarily give you the return. It might help boost GDP to an extent, and then you get some tax revenue back, but it's not going to be enough to help service the debt. So I think that's what you're driving at, isn't it? What we had here in Queensland.
It's often used that we're going to have an indirect benefit from the GDP boom. And I just note that since we've had the government trying to help boost GDP more, our productivity has gone down further. So I see no evidence of them succeeding
Yeah.
in these tasks. I'd like
Yeah.
them to just stick to something we can measure.
Yeah. Good point.
Anyway, that is the debt rant for today. Urgent but not important, but something we have to keep an eye on long term. It's easy to understand why people would be much more vexed in the short term about cost of living concerns, about the decay of their local community if they feel that, or war issues, or gas prices, or immigration, or 1,000 other things that seems to be here in your face right now. And I'm not saying don't be worried about those things, but just keep this in the back of your mind. It's not an unimportant issue just because it's not blowing up this week.
But I mean, John, as the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, we should be saying that one of the big problems with the reason we've got the cost of living crisis is because the government is taking so much in tax. They're taking so much of our income, and so we've got to,
Well, look, I can't let. I think we were about to get through a whole episode without doing the standard rant. Look, that's true. It's a kind of a different issue to the debt one. The debt issue, I think, is driven by the fact the government can't get their spending under control because they're addicted to try to hand us back our own money every election cycle in the hope of keeping their jobs. So it's a spending control issue, in my opinion, there. Whereas the productivity issue, fundamentally different issue. It's a microeconomic issue, and our productivity is. Here's the rant. You would have heard it before.
Yes.
The only two things that can get productivity going are investment and innovation. And the only things long-term that can drive investment and innovation that aren't just made up bullshit by a politician trying to get elected is private investment or investment in productive capital. And I already said that, investment and innovation. The only things to drive investment and innovation are lower taxes, less regulation, and cheaper energy.
Yeah.
So that's simple, follow it through. Cost of living is high because productivity is low. Productivity is low because we don't have enough investment and innovation. Investment and innovation are low because taxes are too high, regulations too high, and energy prices are too high. If you want to fix the problem fundamentally, eventually you're going to have to cut tax, reduce regulation, and get energy prices back to a more reasonable level. And if you're not doing that, you are dancing around the problem. So that is the pitch we do every week, Sinks.
That's so slack. I always just say, cut taxes, cut spending, cut green tape, cut red tape, cut blue tape, and do it all again.
That's all regulation.
And cuts taxes and cut spending. As Milton Friedman famously said, you should always cut taxes, and if you don't know what to do next, cut taxes again.
Ended up. With that said, let's move on to the questions from our long-suffering audience, about to tick over the 3,000 mark. All right, we'll start back at the beginning. The title of this has Sleepwalking Towards a Fiscal Cliff. Sleepwalking is different to the intentional and managed decline seen right across the West. I'm not sure. I'm sure some people are just trying to destroy the West. I think don't underestimate the degree to which self-serving but not very intelligent politicians just sort of sleepwalk into stupid policy. There may be malicious actors out there. Indeed, I'm sure there are malicious actors out there, but they're also just a bunch of numpties who are trying to get reelected, and they just look at an opinion poll, and the opinion poll tells them do the easy thing, and so they do the easy thing. And that's why I call it sleepwalking. Feel free to jump in, fellas, if you have anything else on it. But Australian debt, like yo-yo dieting. The Libs 2007 got it to zero. Labor within a few years put it back on. Except we haven't had many diets in the last 20 years. I got to say, it's only a yo. We haven't got the second yo. It's stopped. I think this was when you were talking about anarchy. Anarchy is what God recommended for the world in the Book of Samuel. There you go.
Yep. If you have a king, he will want taxes and revenues and will take your daughters as slaves. It's a very famous quote. I can never quite remember it. But yes.
Well, the Book of Judges is it's named after the idea of having a group of judicial overseers, basically just people running courts with no king. So the Book of Judges is how it worked on anarchy. My tipple tonight is water, because I've taken a month off drinking as I prepare to do my do some army training, which requires me to be a bit fitter than I am. And so in a desperate attempt to fake fitness, I'm just taking a month off alcohol instead. Wish me luck. That's the hard part. When we're talking about chickens, we have quails as well. We've got baby quails. They are literally this big. It's ridiculous. And yeah, some of them get squashed as well.
Deep fried on a stick.
Once they get a bit bigger, I think. I mean, that's really not a... Quail eggs are tasty, but there's so much work to get such little protein. But the kids love it because they get to feel like they have eggs that are the same size to them as chicken eggs are to us. So anyway, deep, important economic issues here. I'll give this one to you, Sinks. How can they, or to Gene, if you like, how can the S&P and NASDAQ go higher given the loss of that helium? I think that was reference to, Gene, to your rant.
Look, to be quite honest, markets are probably looking through the current troubles of the world.
Yeah.
I would imagine the war in Iran can't go on for too much longer. And it just more or less depends what comes out at the other end. I can't imagine with the Americans also blockading the Straits of Hormuz that the Iranians are getting any income right now. So they're going to have to fold. There's the guy, Robert Kiyosaki, I think his name is, from the guy who wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yes.
If you want some very good analysis of what's going on in the Iran war, on his Facebook page, every day he puts up 10 points, what you need to know. That's really good. But so I'm giving him a bit of a shout. Not necessarily his books, but his Facebook page every day. So I'm thinking the markets are looking through all of this. I think we probably, if the Iranians cave, we will probably have a period of greater stability in future than what we've had over the last 40 years. And so that would tend to suggest returns will be higher. So if it goes well, I think the markets are suggesting it's going to go very well. Bearing in mind, markets change very quickly. So, new information comes, that could change within seconds.
Indeed. Yeah, markets are very forward-looking. So they're not just looking at what's happening now. They're looking at changes in estimates. And their changes are based on not whether the future will be good or bad, but whether the future will be better or worse than what they thought it was yesterday. And that's what dictates the changes. So if you think there's going to be 10 nuclear explosions tomorrow, but you previously thought there was going to be 12, the markets will go up at that point. But can I ask you two things without wanting to get too much into the sidetrack on the war issues? Is it your estimate that the Iranians have a lower capacity to tolerate hardship than the Western world?
The Iranians have a lower capacity right now to tolerate a loss of income than do the Americans. Because bearing in mind, there's two aspects to this crisis. The first aspect of the crisis that everybody's jumping up and down about is that oil prices are high. That's what Gene showed us at the beginning. The second aspect of the crisis is that we are going to run out of oil, or we are going to run out of fertilizer, or what have you. Now, that's actually the far more important part of the crisis. The United States is self-sufficient in oil production. They don't need oil from the Middle East.
No, I agree. I just think they haven't had a great track record at tolerating hardship in a lead up to a midterms with oil prices high. I'm not sure they have the political will.
They have not, no. But I think Mr. Trump is a second-term president. What does he care? So I think right now his tolerance for pain is lower than the Iranian regime's tolerance for pain. And the question is in Iran. Yeah, sorry. And the question right now is who is in charge of Iran? Because we're actually getting two conflicting messages every day coming out of Iran. Some part of the government is saying we want to negotiate. Another part of the government is saying we don't want to negotiate. I suspect Mr. Trump's strategy is that one version of that government is going to kill off the other version of the government, and they're either going to say no or they're going to say yes, we're going to cave. So it's a bit of brinkmanship here. But I think they're going to hold that blockade in place. I don't think the Iranians have the tolerance.
I think there is a chance that the Iranian willingness to negotiate may be a figment of Trump's imagination. But we'll see. I guess we'll see over the coming.
Well, as you know, the old statement, time will resolve uncertainty. We will see. But, I kind of
one other quick question, which I won't argue with you on, but I'm curious. What would Iran caving look like in your opinion? Without,
I kind of think that they would probably promise to stop financing and exporting their revolution to the rest of the world. They would stop tolling ships going through the Straits of Hormuz. They would stop bombing their neighbors. I mean, these are all incredible things to think that, one Middle Eastern country is bombing their neighbors as opposed to the infidel Westerners. So I kind of think a cessation of hostilities. In the ideal world, there would be some sort of regime change. How the Iranian governments have been treating their own citizens for this last 40 years is completely unacceptable by most standards. So I would hope that some sort of moderation, regime change, certainly cessation of sort of acts of violence against their neighbors, exporting their revolution to the rest of the world. If you kind of think most African countries, people leave those dictators alone because they don't try to export their crazy ideas to the rest of us, whereas the Iranians have. They broke the peace, and now they're reaping the whirlwind. That's how it works.
Oh, good. I said I wouldn't argue, so I'll hold myself back. But I just say two of those things I think would be quite easy to get, and I think they've already offered. There, two of those I don't think they're going to do. So I don't think the IRGC will give up power by themselves, and I don't think they would see it's within their. I think they would consider it immoral beyond the capacity to tolerate for them to what they would see as abandon their allies. So those two I don't see them doing. But I suspect they always have on the table that
they won't
you stop bombing me, I'll stop bombing you.
They won't do that voluntarily. We're in full agreement. Yes.
Yeah. So then, if that's what you said, you thought they would give up.
Well,
I'm not sure they will give up those things unless they are rolled, and I'm not sure exactly how you roll them without boots on the ground, and I'm not sure how that gets the oil prices back down anytime soon. But anyway, we can live and learn as we watch the world, as you said. Time will teach us all. Crisafulli's efforts seem worthwhile. Wedging over. Look, I think he's been performing quite well, politically speaking. Probably making a name for himself as a leader in LNP clothes. Well played indeed. I think this is a reference to one of your comments, Sinks, about the government would be put in jail.
Yes, so this is one of my hobby horses that really annoys me, is that there is, I think politicians should go to jail. I think more politicians should go to jail more often. I did hear a fantastic story once that every past president of South Korea has been prosecuted. And I think that's an awesome outcome. Unfortunately, there's also an argument to be made that if you just pay people who are terrible at doing things just to go away and stop, that's probably more efficient than doing all sorts of other things, which really annoys me because I would love to see the bastards going to jail. But sometimes just saying, okay, you got your lifelong pension, please bugger off and leave the rest of us alone. There's a bit of a trade-off there between what you want to see as justice and what you want to see is let's just live our lives without these people destroying them.
The counterpoint to that, I like the idea of putting them all in jail, before they become politicians, perhaps. But it's the counterpoint to that is if they know that leaving power is going to lead to them being in jail, you significantly increase their incentive to rort the system in every which way, using all manner of unsavory tactics. They're not going to accept a loss in that scenario.
No. So that's why you pay them to go. That's
what's the criminal offence though, Sinclair? If misleading the people, is that what we're saying? That
well, yes. So a director putting out false financial information would be prosecuted for fraud or whatever they call it. I kind of think a politician should be done for more or less the same thing, misleading conduct or whatever they call it,
and getting a financial benefit, even if it's not as direct or as obvious.
Yes. Or even just bring back the stocks. There's a lot to be said for bringing back the stocks. Yes. What was the next question, John? You took it down.
Yes, there's another one for you.
Because there's always an argument, there's always a story, there's always an explanation. We did this for that. We had reason to believe at the time. Even just go back to COVID. We were told we were all going to die. Our species was going to go extinct. What's the cost right now of just being a little bit cautious, and in an abundance of caution, we shut down the economy and destroyed people's lives and unleashed inflation and what have you. But at the time, there's always somebody's going to make an excuse, or I stand with Dan, or whatever it is that they're talking about. So in actual fact, you actually just have to say, yes, borrow as much as you can, and at some point you're going to splat against the rocks below, and that's going to happen. And you can stand there, and if you're a bad person like me, I'll be standing there saying, "I told you." But you know, it is unfortunate that there are always plausible stories as to why people are doing what they did when they did them, and it's just one of these things you just can't explain.
And for the rest of us, we just have to stock up on gold, canned foods, and ammunition.
Toilet paper. I always thought I would be saving up gold and ammunition, but no, toilet paper.
The currency of our future. Gympie and the gold rush saved Queensland from becoming New South Wales. Oh, wow. Thank God for that. The feds wanted to bankrupt states to get rid of them and have, I think, full control. Maybe it's both. Full control.
Well, the fools have control. There's no doubt about that.
I think this is just running through the idea of good debt is on an investment that makes sense, not on recurrent spending. Absolutely true.
Yep.
I think we answered this one at the time. They did try.
Yeah.
Yes. No, they did try.
RDub's suggestion on the fossil fuels, just nationalize them. Well, I don't think government-run businesses have a great track record at running overly well. The other issue you have there is the political risk premium that you'd be adding to all future investments. So you'd basically be ruling out any further private investment, given that everyone knows that they'd be making the investment and the government would be stealing all their hard work.
And we have actually had nationalized fossil fuel exporters in the past, and wasn't such a good idea. So something we've tried.
So one thing that I think, actually this comes up a little bit later, I think from the same person. So I'll see if I find that comment. No, I can't see it. But RDub said at one point, why don't we use the Norway model? The Norway model has a partly nationalized system. One thing you need to be aware then, that does mean that taxpayers' money or government debt needs to be used to do all of the capital investment in the first place. Right, so you are going to have to use a lot more of our money to start with. And then, yes, you get some of the returns. That's the same as starting any business and getting the returns. And we already have a system where the government invests in businesses and gets the returns. It's called the Future Fund. So instead of investing all of the government's money in one fossil fuel company, they are diversified. They've got a diversified portfolio. And perhaps they shouldn't, but they do. We have a government investment bank. We have 7 government investment banks, but they're all run by the same people. Holding, $80 billion in assets. And the idea that the future fund should, and basically this argument comes down to, instead of having diversified assets through the future fund, why don't they concentrate those assets in some businesses that we think will be particularly profitable? The danger there, of course, is you don't actually know how profitable they're going to be until you actually go through with the business. So that's why people diversify.
The other thing I always point out when people talk about the Norwegian model is that there are as many people living in Norway as there are in Victoria. So they've actually got a very small population. They've also got a very homogeneous population. The other thing is their disposable household income relative to Australian household income is lower. So we're actually better off than the Norwegians in terms of our national wealth and what have you. So I don't know why we would copy the policies of a country that's poorer than us as opposed to a country that's richer than us. So we should actually go down that route. Now, a lot of people say, oh, Norway is richer than us because their GDP is higher than ours. So that GDP is oil income. But if you look at their private household disposable income, they are actually quite a lot poorer than us.
But they are much better skiers. So, you win some, you lose some.
I think I've been in snow once or twice in my life, so this skiing business is for other people, I think.
Ryan's asking about who owns the resources. Look, technically speaking, just legally speaking in Australia, the state governments do. The state governments own the resources under the ground. Whether they should is an open question. In America, if you own land, you own the resources under the land. So they have a much more libertarian understanding of resource ownership.
Depends which state you're in.
Is that so?
Okay. I think there are some states in the United States where the state government owns, but very few. But very often when they find stuff, that changes very quickly as well. But anything more than 6 inches under the ground of your house belongs to the state government. And when you buy a house, there'll be this thing, a caveat saying no quarrying. That's what they're saying. You can't go digging under your house to find resources.
Yeah, so that when the states charge royalties, to some degrees, you could say that is just them selling their asset. So that's if you accept the legitimacy of their ownership of the resource, that is a much more legitimate type of tax because they're just selling something they own.
Yeah. Well, that's why it doesn't often. They don't classify it as a tax, do they, John? Royalties. Like if you look at the tax statistics, they'll have it as
it shows up as assets,
outside of the tax.
asset sales.
Yes, it's an asset sale.
Richard Dennis has a lot to say in a Senate review. Japan taxes the imported fuel on its customers. All right, well, we tax the fuel that we use as well. I mean, fuel tax isn't a revolutionary idea. Look, Richard Dennis is an eloquent advocate for his argument, but he's one of the people making the case for a gas export tax, to which I would say we could have a reasonable conversation on changing PRRT. But when they assume no behavioral change, they've got to know they're just lying to try and trick people into their policy, which is not the way I think you should go about policy debate. And look, it shouldn't apply on the states because the states already have their taxing system set up. If you want Queensland to change its royalty system, approach the Queensland government. Don't try to stomp on our federal system.
Even to this point, we've got excise tax and we have GST on fuel. So our fuel's been taxed too.
And the excise has GST charged on it. So
yes, it's absolutely outrageous. Yes.
Another one for you, Sinks.
Yeah, machete bins. Yes. If only I had the contract selling machete bins to the government. Yes, I think New South Wales and Victoria should definitely prospect for gas and oil. Now, this is where I can't off the top of my head, what are those people called who work out the GST allocations?
Grants Commission.
The Grants Commission. This is where the Commonwealth Grants Commission could actually pick up the ball, where they could actually say to states, you have got these unexploited resources in your territory that you could be earning revenue from, and actually start penalising New South Wales and Victoria for not drilling for gas and oil. A huge failure on the part of the Commonwealth Grants Commission.
I think the GST should be passed back to the states where the money was earned. And if that can't be done, then give it back to the states on a per capita basis. And that would take away this welfare mentality that our states currently have, that they just get to bludge off the productivity of other states. So abolish the Grants Commission. You know, one line on a spreadsheet would be able to divvy it up by population.
So just while I'm thinking about it, does Queensland make a net contribution to GST or not? I don't think so.
We're pretty close to even. I think it's
it's about 1.02 is the average relativity over since GST was introduced.
Okay.
But so we're slightly net beneficiaries of it. But yeah, like as John said, it's maybe you could argue it's marginal. Yeah.
Yep.
The question of if Canberra isn't getting the gas money, don't they just distribute less GST to that state? Well, the way it works out is basically the more incompetent your state is, the worse policies you have, and the more you've driven your state into the ground, the more you are rewarded. That is basically how the Grants Commission works in divvying up GST, which you can tell by the way I said it, I don't think is a very smart system.
A very astonishing perverse incentive. It's just crazy.
There are some assets we can still sell. RW says we can just sell Alice Springs.
And I would throw in Canberra too if they were quiet about it.
Oh, I would pay them to take Canberra.
Canberra's a very pleasant place to live, apart from the weather. It's a beautiful city. I think it's well laid out. I quite.
I don't mind the cold either.
Apart from the weather, I thought, some of those months, the darkness, the cold, it could get a bit trying. But otherwise, I think it's a beautiful city.
Well, we have it for our Norwegian friends when they come and visit. We've got a cold, dark place for them to hide. Jordan Ditloff writes in, I heard Costello talking to Credlin last night on Sky without being able to see the screen and knew it was him immediately. Okay. This was the point I was making before about how the states, the onshore gas would be double taxed. Again, if you want the tax to be higher, just approach the state government and make the case for increasing royalties. The fact that our onshore gas companies are making an average rate of return of about, I think, maximum of 12%, it ranges between 4 to 12%. they sound like pretty normal returns to me, which suggests to me that the state has probably set royalties at roughly the correct level. Now, if those rates of return started spiking, you could make the case that the states could increase royalties. If those gas companies started going bust, you could make the case for decreasing those royalties. But I don't see the case for having two different taxes. It's a perfectly good tax that's well structured. If you want it to be higher, approach the state government and make your case. Yes. Well, my next training course is coming up, so I have been showing up a bit more often. I'm sad to hear I've been swearing that much. I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, there's a little bit of cursing before, but yeah, I think it was warranted at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, those fuckers had it coming.
That's the way you. Any fuel going overseas should pay a tax, just like Norway. Yeah, again, the Norwegian system is quite different to ours. Also, the Norwegians actually do have a system somewhat similar to PRRT. They've just got more established projects. And the issue with PRRT is it's going to increase. It's going to pay more revenue in the long run. It's got a system where you allow the projects to get a normal rate of return first. And once they've done that, as they start getting higher rates of return, then you really start getting the tax revenue. That's the way it's set up. So in the early stages, you get nothing. And in the latter stages, you get plenty. So it's a little hard to judge it as of yet.
The Norwegians also export most of their stuff anyway. So given their geography, they can actually rely on hydro and things like that. So
they also put it through pipes. I mean, their gas goes through pipes. Yes. Ours has to be condensed into liquid and put onto ships. Yes. So that kind of changes their situation as well. Look, the Norwegian model is, their tax system isn't as advantageous as a lot of people think it is. The main difference is their government has put up billions of dollars of their own capital, right? Instead of having their future fund having a diversified asset, they've got a very non-diversified set of assets. We have government ownership of companies. It's just called the future fund, and it's diversified. So we could just make a case for, should the future fund, bet all their money on a few number of businesses? You could make that case. The
other thing you should do is, if you want to compare the size of their sovereign wealth fund to ours, you need to actually add up our future fund and our private superannuation balances. That's the equivalent number, and our equivalent number is bigger than their equivalent number. So again, it looks bigger because you're not comparing like with like. The Norwegian model is not something we should be following.
I'm just trying to catch up on there's a lot of messages coming in at the end here.
Well, gentle people, we are well past 10. So
I got past the 2-hour mark. So without the ability to quickly scroll through these, I might just call that a day. So thank you to everyone who has written in and joined the conversation. Thank you very much, Sinks, for coming and joining us. One of the things we do to wrap up is without giving you any warning, throw to you and say, what have you taken away from this chat? Anything interesting, exciting, or painfully stupid you would like to comment on?
Well, in the 20 years I've known you, John, you were always a communist with crazy left-wing ideas. And I'm pleased to see that nothing has changed. You've got these crazy left-wing ideas. But more importantly, I actually think it's very important that we actually make these economic arguments, that we get out and say to people, this is what's going on in the economy. There seems to be fewer voices being sensible anymore. The sort of fragmentation of the media allows state governments to get away with almost murder because nobody's covering them anymore, and everybody's covering the politics of the budget, and nobody's covering the economics of the budget. And we actually need to get back to providing people with basic economic information. So you guys are doing that. Looks very well. So more strength to your arms.
Thanks, Sink.
I will take. I'll take that as you volunteering to come in for our budget session. So now you're on the hook.
Well, it's been one of our most popular guests. So, yeah, really good feedback in the comments. It's great.
Oh, well, thank you, guys. It's been very enjoyable.
Yes, they were all saying that thanks to you, it made Gene and I look better by comparison. So it's I really appreciate the.
Yeah, we're fine. I've got some intelligent commentary on the show.
I have got a better haircut than both of you.
Indeed. Gene, thank you as always. What is your parting words of wisdom or anything taken from this session?
Look, yeah, great discussion. I'm still thinking about why we should reverse the Treaty of Westphalia, which I'm going to be thinking about that for the rest of the week, I think, or for until the next episode. It's extraordinary. I've always thought of that as a positive thing, but yeah,
we are.
Yeah, good point. Good stuff.
All right, very good. So thank you, gents. Thank you at home for listening along. We do this every Thursday evening at 8 p.m. now that daylight savings has finished. This is live streamed on the YouTubes, the Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and you can find us on Rumble and Substack. This is put together by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, taxpayers.org.au, and we're on Substack, Oz Taxpayers, AUS Taxpayers.substack.com. Please go along there, have a look at what we're doing, read through the articles, check out our campaigns, and if you have a couple of dollars, please consider becoming a member. Just a couple of dollars a month helps us to keep doing what we are doing. With all of that said, thank you for joining us. See you next week. Stay happy and stay free.